My name is Melissa Cheyney, and I'm a medical anthropologist at Oregon State University. I'm associate professor here, and I'm also a midwife. So my research focuses on a field of medical anthropology called evolutionary medicine. And in evolutionary medicine, we try to understand how humans evolved and then how we live today, and ask if there's any differences between how we evolved and how we live today, and how that might produce problems for us, especially health issues. So the premise of my work is something called the discordance hypothesis. And this is the idea that because humans have these really long generations, it takes a long time for us to evolve and change over time. So we essentially live in these upper Paleolithic bodies that are about 50,000 years old in terms of the model of our body. And then we live in this information age society. So probably some of the best known theories around evolutionary medicine really have to do with what we eat and how much we exercise. So human ancestors would have moved around a lot to collect their food and eaten lots of vegetable material and a small amount of meat, and been relatively lean and lots of high muscle mass. And today, it's sort of the opposite of that. We have lots of high-fat foods available to us, and we end up doing a lot of what I'm doing right now, and that's sitting still. So we have some health issues that emerge from that discordance, or that separation between how we evolved and how we live today. And in my work, I ask how that applies to birth and early parenting. So in evolutionary medicine, we're often looking not only at what other human groups do that have more traditional practices, but also at what other primates do. And if you look across the primate order, what we see is that when babies are born, the mom brings the baby up to the chest, often to the left side, and they look at each other, they stare into one another's eyes, and they have a way of vocalizing that's kind of quiet but also high-pitched. And babies and mothers across the primate order will sort of stare into each other's eyes and imprint and begin to bond with one another. And as they do that, the baby's heartbeat regulates to that of the mother, the breathing regulates, and so does the body temperature. So in evolutionary medicine, we call that co-evolution. So we understand that the mother and the baby have sort of in this dance evolved together over time to meet each other's needs. And so as an evolutionary biologist and as a midwife, it has always made sense in my practice to sort of ask what is the normal human condition, or what is the normal primate condition, and then work to support our evolved biology rather than working against it. So from the perspective of evolutionary medicine, we would never think about taking a baby away from his or her mother. Everything in that woman's body and in that baby want to be together, and they have co-evolved over many thousands of years to need that. One of probably the best known examples would be the way third stage is managed among primates who have placentas. So once the baby is born, mom puts the baby up to the chest, and right away the baby begins to nuzzle at the breast. The mother secretes oxytocin that causes the uterus to clamp down, and it controls bleeding. And that has allowed for the particular kind of live birth that mammals have. So in evolutionary medicine, we say, don't mess with that unless you have to. There are certain, of course, pathological conditions where we would want to intervene. But in a normal, healthy delivery, we want to work with the evolved biology of the mother and baby and not against it. And I think there are real benefits that science is showing us today. It's like they're rediscovering what evolution has taught us all along, and that is that mom and baby need to be together. So I see a couple things. One is very practical, and the other I think is larger and sort of ideological. And the first one is that there are a lot of practices in place that can function to keep mother and baby separated. So if you have restrictions about how frequently the baby's vital signs have to be taken, or whether they need a bath, those things can cause the baby to be taken away from the mother, not out of absolute necessity, because of course it's possible to do those things on the mother, but just because of ease or the culture of the particular place where you're working, it's become normative to separate mom and baby, and we think of that as acceptable. And so that's what we do, and sometimes we find ourselves then having to work back to put programs and protocols in place to facilitate that after sometimes many generations of having that separation be there. So we're sort of working back against that cultural flow. But I think ultimately part of it is sort of a mistrust of nature and putting more emphasis in technology, and as a society believing that somehow technology provides us with an improvement over nature, and that just simply doesn't work for evolutionary biologists. We know that natural selection, selective pressures are wicked when it comes to reproduction, and humans wouldn't be here if there hadn't been selective pressures over time that sort of shaped mothers and babies. And so again, we want to work with that rather than against that. So a fundamental respect for the maternal body and for the baby, and having a sense that in the absence of a pathological condition, in the absence of disease, this should work relatively smoothly because it's the result of 5 to 7 million years of evolution. So we put a lot of faith in that, and I think wouldn't want to go against that unless absolutely necessary. So a reverence for that over the idea that we can somehow improve upon Mother Nature. There's a little bit of arrogance there, I think, as well. You know, in my work, I really see sort of the pregnancy, the birth, and the postpartum as this continuum. And I think that one of the things that has so impressed me from talking to women around the world is how important their birth experience really is to them. Oftentimes I think we can get kind of clinical about it. One of my research participants called our model of birth a fast food model of birth, which I think, you know, in anthropology we often will study a particular topic, and it really provides us with a lens into what the cultural value system is. So if you think about the reliance on technology, a fast food model of birth, that is pretty reflective of U.S. society. But cross-culturally, women really remember their birth experience, and often how they get started out on that journey really matters for them and for their relationship with their child. So I'd like to see us come back to remembering how valuable that experience really is, and to trust the body and trust the mother and trust the baby to do what they've evolved to do, intervening only when absolutely necessary. So my work is really motivated around trying to define what the range of normal really is for human birth. And when you've had so many years of intervening and providing medications, for example, that augment or speed up labor, it's pretty hard to understand what is normal labor, what's an average length, what's an appropriate length, what's too long. And so most of my work has really focused on normal physiologic birth, and I see that as extending into the early parenting period. So what are the things that we can do to support the relationship between the mother and infant so that breastfeeding is smoother, so that the mother is getting the benefits of those positive hormones right after the birth to help with her psychosocial state as she's transitioning into being a parent, which is a very difficult job. What can we do to work with rather than against that, and provide women with all the social supports that we know they need to be successful, and not just for U.S. women or for white Euro-American women who can afford it, but for all women in our culture and cross-culturally. You know, we have a saying in anthropology, we say that we can't all be created equal if we don't get an equal start in life. So part of it is removing some of the layers of, you know, institutional racism and structural violence that give some people access to the kinds of birth that they want, and others don't have that. And what we really need to do is try to remove all of those structural barriers so that everyone gets the best possible start that they can have in life. And when mothers get to a position where they're struggling, and we all have faced those times because we know how challenging parenting can be, you can either have a birth experience that you recall back that feels sacred and special and blessed to you, and draw on that really positive energy and experience to go forward and parent your child, or you can draw back on that experience and feel re-victimized and traumatized and alienated from your child. And it's a much different picture to be parenting from that second place. So while opponents or people who aren't so sure they want to make these changes in their spaces can sometimes act like this is not that important, I would totally disagree. I think it's absolutely essential, and many cultural groups actually refer to that first hour after birth as sacred, and they do that because it means it's special. It's not mundane. It's not like the everyday. There is something unique about this moment that will never happen again for that mother and baby, and if we can all call to mind that before we attend a delivery and try to keep that space sacred for mothers and babies, that can only bring good. That doesn't bring hatred or negativity or frustration or fear or pain or suffering. It brings goodness and kindness and compassion and power. And I think that's really where we want all of our mothers and babies to start from. So I think it's of critical importance. The birth that actually comes to mind as I think about skin to skin and how valuable it is my own birth experience. You know, because I was a midwife for years before I ever had my own baby. And I had a really challenging labor. My baby was posterior. I pushed for a long time. And when she was born, she wasn't, didn't immediately breathe. I had to stim her and just give her a little bit of, a little bit of oxygen to get her going. But the moment of her actually, emerging and me reaching down for her and bringing her up to my chest, it was the most magical moment of my entire life. And I remember, thinking in that moment, she needs a little extra love right now, but she came around really quickly, and then there's no way anybody would have been able to take her out of my arms. No way. I felt I had earned that time with her for all the hard work that had led up to it. And I remember thinking in that moment, beyond just thinking of how much I loved her instantaneously, is that I will keep being a midwife. No matter how challenging it gets to be a home birth midwife in this country, I will keep doing it so that every woman has the opportunity to feel these moments that I just felt. I think it's critical. And you know what? I thought about it probably 100 times a day for the first 6 weeks of her life, and could relive for a few moments what that actual moment felt like and what that first hour was like with her. Now I still think about it, not 100 times a day, but I think about it every week, every month. It's still something that propels me in my parenting. And yeah, I'm committed. I think every woman should have that moment, that time.